Hi, my name's Dr. Russell Thackeray, and I want to talk a little bit today about building resilience in family businesses for continuity. It's a subject I have a great deal of passion for. I've worked in the field of resilience for many years, and I thought it'd be useful maybe to talk a little bit about myself and then get cracking on the subject. So basically, my background is professional musician, marketing, sales, CEO. I've worked in psychotherapy and therapy, worked a lot with social enterprise. I'm a hypnotherapist, neuroscientist, and as you can tell in a long career, I've spent quite a lot of time now doing coaching, working with organizations to help them really get to grips with these sorts of subjects. I've written some books which are available on Amazon, and you can also look at that link there now. And if you want to book a chat with me, you can by clicking on that link. As a business psychologist, of course, though, I'm used to working with the organization as if it was an organism. And that's really interesting. So it gives us the ability to have a strong metaphor to think about both the people within the organization, but also the organization itself. So today I just want to touch on some thoughts really around this idea of resilience, business resilience, and the links of that, and the way leadership's working. Oh, we're only going to take about 30, 40 minutes. So strap in. It'll be quick. And for those of you who want to listen and actually have a bit more focused attention on it, using the words of Dr. Michael Mosley, someone I admired very much, maybe just select one thing as we go through and see if it's useful for you. So the narrative at the moment is pretty confused. It's pretty difficult. There's a lot of change in the world. Arguably, we're going from a post-colonial world to a new type of empire structure. We've got the change in relationships between some of the power blocks in the world, America, China, Africa, Asia, such like. We're seeing a world that's been still recovering in a way from COVID, a world where news is under threat, the idea of truth versus rumor, huge problems with immigration, and of course, the rise of social media and mental health issues. So it's quite an interesting world at the moment. Also, the world has never been better, it's never been safer, it's never been a better place to live in a way, but in terms of health and well-being outcomes. But it doesn't feel that way sometimes. And I prompted to ChatGPT about what's coming at us over the next 5 to 10 years. You'll see these sorts of things coming at us. This idea of the world changing, work changing, demographics changing, obviously, climate change, which apparently doesn't exist anymore, but climate change is going to have a huge effect on us. And of course, we're seeing the rise of far right populism parties, which are disrupting, making the return of nationalism, I think, much more likely. And I suppose what we're seeing, therefore, is in Africa, for example, very different types of pressures, more around how to build capacity, because Africa is one of the great growth regions in the world. China has had massive growth. India is in that sense, but the whole of Africa, of course, would dwarf any growth coming from there. But the market's more fragmented. The nation states are stronger and weaker at the same time. And basically, what you have is Africa getting off its knees and onto its feet and really striding forward, freeing the shackles of a post-colonial past. But the volatility is there, the lack of investment sitting in there, and the scourge of Western Europe now, which is the onset of corruption, has long been something that African businesses have had to think about. So just looking at these sorts of things, there's challenges in access to capital financial management have been a challenge. Talent is an issue because actually growth rates have been quite low. And of course, climate is a massive issue in that part of the world. So building resilience in an organization where these things are underway means you have to be quite clear on capacity building because it's not just about coping with shocks now and change now. You've got to be able to project into the future and figure out where you're going. Now, we know that resilience is important at a personal level. It's good for your health, obviously. As business level, it's very good for you, and it gives the organization a chance to have better performance, pivot, change, cope with shocks, cope with change generally. And we obviously think about this idea that resilience being compromised is an issue because it strikes at the heart of people's confidence, their ability to cope. That can, especially in a senior leadership team, can make the organization seem less sure in itself and actually affect some of the big relationships which sit in the heart of organizations, which is really important. So let's actually just think about resilience. Some people call it adaptability. And I'm going to start at the end, which is this idea that we bounce back. Something bad has happened and we're bouncing back. I prefer the phrase bounce forward because if you bounce back, it implies that you're going back to where you were. And I think with any process like this, there has to be some accountability within it and there has to be some learning. Otherwise, you don't get the benefits from having resilience in the first place. And so before that, another thought of being resilient is that sort of weathering the storm piece before you break, as it were. And this maybe it's called being resolute rather than resilient or something, but this idea of having stamina. But I think one of the things that we have to do is think about the stages here in terms of understanding how our resilience has been compromised and what we need to do to feed into resilience to make sure that we have more resoluteness. And then if something does go wrong, we can bounce back more quickly and obviously build the capacity in the good times. So I think that's what I'm talking about when I talk about these stages. And it's quite interesting, out of sheer interest, I just looked at the different types of economic crashes and economic resilience, and they talk about having these different shaped recoveries. And there's an absolute correlation here between personal resilience, bouncing back or bouncing forward, the L shape doing that, and then being stuck, the U shape, the V shape, which is very steep, the K shape, as you can see there, W, J, and Z. I mean, it's really interesting. And I think what we're saying here is different organizations, different teams, different people will come back from failure in different ways at different speeds and at different times. So one of the things I want us to have a think about is this sort of model that we put together. And it's called the ropes toolkit and it has 5 factors really. It's built on the concept of potential and it links together your body, your personality, cognition, and emotion. And then practical toolkits sit around the outside. So regulation, and that means for a person is that they are self-regulated and know themselves and can manage themselves. For an organization, that means they have a way of having management systems in place and metrics. Optimism is all about one's mindset and our ability to see positives and things. Now, that's very different from this concept of positive thinking or even toxic positivity where everything's great all the time. Optimism is a learned state where we see something and we attribute good things to ourselves. The same with an organization, that the organization can look and say, this is where we're going with a degree of risk profiling. Purpose is really important. For large organizations, having a strong sense of purpose is often quite straightforward, but sometimes family businesses or smaller businesses can have something a bit suboptimal because what they end up doing is saying, actually, our purpose is to generate this revenue over the next 5 years, which is just a metric, really. That's not a purpose, that's more of just a target. And so I think that thing about making sure that you look at your organization as having some benefit other than financial or other than personal is really important. If you want other people to buy into it, and most people have stakeholders who you want to either invest or work for you or buy from you, and it's really important that basically your customers don't think that your purpose is just to maximize the amount you take from them for the lowest amount of service, for example. Energy is all about literally how much energy we have on our processes in an organization, but also as human beings, how much energy we have in ourselves, how much sleep we're getting, and all those things. And stamina is the degree to which we persevere and stick to things to the point where then we need to innovate and move on. Now, people talk a lot about burnout, and burnout is a workplace condition. And it was first thought of by Herbert Freudenberger, who is a German psychotherapist or psychiatrist, sorry. And it was a medical condition. And a lot of people now have corrupted this term to mean basically being really tired or overwhelmed. And what happens here is that you end up with physical and cognitive exhaustion to the point where you can't think straight. But the point of it is that you stop caring. And burnout was originally something that was a tribute to to people that were in the caring professions, and therefore the lack of caring or that lack of distance is really important because you lose that sense of empathy, and of course it makes you less professionally proficient because of course you've lost 2 or 3 of those things. You're exhausted, you're overworked, you're overwhelmed, you don't have the tools you need, but also that you've switched off somehow, and that's really important. Now I hear people banding around the term burnout as if it's you just they didn't get a good night's sleep last week. And it's one of the challenges with terms like this. They lose their meaning quite quickly. And so, broadly, these are the areas that exist in work that generate burnout, for which you need resilience. So, meetings, long hours, no surprise here. But the big surprise is the degree to which these things are rated. And for most organizations, now I know it'll be different if you're a tire fitter and the outskirts of Timbuktu and has got to being a professional actuary sitting in the odd in London. These things are different, but they have some similarities. But the first thing is this irrelevance of meetings. This idea that we spend a lot of our time wasted in meetings. We spend all day at work in meetings, then we go later in the day, we do some work. Poor leadership is a massive thing that comes out. And especially in family businesses, smaller businesses, you've got the leader, and often the leader can't grow the organization bigger than their capacity to lead it. And that can be a challenge. And I've worked with many organizations that have suffer from poor leadership and they're hobbled in their ability to scale. Email, obviously, you'd expect things like this, overwork the actual volume and the grind of work. I think this is the thing, isn't it? If you're doing work that has no meaning, which doesn't seem to have any purpose, you have a challenge here. Literal, the tools that you have, the hours that you work, especially these days when we're hybrid and sitting in one place. The politics, the rust, that's the boringness, and obviously travel. So one of the things you have to think about in an organization is, am I creating the situation where people's resilience is being compromised? Do I have inefficient, pointless meetings? There's some research that pointed to the effect that meeting leaders usually enjoyed meetings and found them more productive than anyone attending them. That says something, doesn't it? And I was a great fan of the work of Kimberly Clark years ago that said no meeting should be longer than 20 minutes, especially for just giving communication backwards and forwards. So it's something to think about, the ROI of meetings in your organization. And what you do about it, of course, is your choice. And as a leader, you have choices. And as members of staff, we have choices. And everything we do is a choice. Everything we do is a response to something else, that freedom to choose, independent will. And whatever you do is be the fact that you're sitting here listening is your choice. That you may be disagreeing. Again, your choice. You just may decide to do nothing. So it was a waste of time. All your choices. And I think the quicker we get to think about choice being something that's really important in life, the quicker we get to this idea of accountability. Because actually, choice is about adult thinking. It's about having the capacity to think in an adult way, but also actually having the prefrontal cortex so to do. Now, some choices are adapted. We make them given the situation we're in. Some of them adopted, they're given to us. Some of them are just instinctual, and that's absolutely fine. But they're all ours. We have to live and die by them. So basically, the consequences of our choices are something we have to bear in mind. We're accountable for our choices and what we do next. And this idea that someone else made me do it, even at gunpoint, it's still your choice to do it or not. And if you do it, which means you don't need to regret the decisions you make. You might want to learn from them, but you don't need to regret all your decisions. And therefore, we get into this really classic idea of choice and making choices that allow you to figure out where you put your time and create your own levels of anxiety. It's also interesting, isn't it, that in an organization, that circle of concern that sits there, we want to be able to push out into that circle of concern by using strategy and planning techniques to get us there. It's often been said, I forget who did say this, I think it was Cy Wakeman who talked about the difference between reality and drama, this idea that there's what's actually going on. And the other thing is the drama or the narrative around it. This sense that as human beings, we have this need to create a drama, we create a narrative of the way we look at the world. This affects how we sell to people, how we manage our stakeholders, all those sorts of things. And people talk about the BMW method, which is this idea that in a culture that's a little bit toxic and burns away resilience, is that a lot of blaming, moaning, and whinging is going on. A lot of excuses, suffering. And what's actually going on here is people are not taking accountability for the decisions they're making. And people are moaning and whinging about stuff. And a good leader's not saying, so what are you going to do about it? What is your plan? What's happening? You'll sit in meetings. So, for example, I sat in a meeting the other day with a sales organization. They were saying the trouble is our customers, they're not the right customers. And it didn't take long to dispel that notion. And the brain is a prediction machine. It's seeing patterns all over the place. Some of those patterns are false. Some of those patterns are helping us. Some of those patterns are not able to be replicated by AI. And what that does for us is gives us unique advantages when we start to think about how we think about thinking. And hopefully that you'll find that amusing, but there you are. That's the degree to which we see patterns in all we do. And patterns are patterns that we want to think about for the future. But patterns also create an issue in organizations for humans and leaders because we have this tendency to think, to anchor things to other pieces of information, to confirm our experience, to have a sort of a sunk cost bias. We value things we spent a lot of time on in the past and don't work. We tend to have a negativity bias. We think everything's going to be poor. And then, of course, this Dunning-Kruger bias, which is this idea that The people who are least qualified to talk about subjects become the most expert. So you need to be careful about how you're talking to yourself. You need to be careful what you're saying as a leader, and you need to be careful what the organization's saying in the world, even by mistake. So this narrative can come true. We are so busy, so we'd be busy. Change is difficult, so it's difficult. And life is tough. So we need to change those things through reframing our ideas, like what Carol Dweck talked about here, putting the word yet at this or not at the moment, making something that's negative, time bound, giving us the idea of saying, I'm terrible at planning at the moment. And now you can say, so what do I want to do about it? What are my choices? And then the use of mantras can be really helpful. So just give us peace at the end of the day. Sometimes these things can be religious, these are secular things. And it's interesting in terms of an organization, you've got a strong strategy, you're talking about your mission or your purpose, and then you'll have some strategies and you'll have ways of choosing which approach you'll take to achieve those mission and visions that you've set for yourself. Then you have tactics and plans. And it's often useful to have a scorecard. And really, the scorecard I use here is just to help us think through in the four classic areas different questions which are focused more around resilience. Thinking forward, does our investment strategy give us cash to thrive or just survive? But also, does it give us war chests? Because in difficult situations, having large sums of cash gives us advantages other organizations might not have. Are we building our balance sheets? Are we looking at other risks other than financial? Are we looking at hard and soft metrics? And also, is budgeting, planning, and projection more about being a useful part of the organization than just counting things up and just being a cost on the business? But these things sitting at the bottom are the things that drive results. In a sense, what's sitting at the top are what's measuring at the what's already happened. So process is really important. Have we got the right strategy for the future? Are we on our operating model and systems, or are we thinking about tomorrow? Does our strategy and our processes cover ambition, governance, succession, innovation, as well as just shareholder return? Are processes creating return on investment? Are they creating burnout? And do the processes link the strategy of the organization to the actions of every person? Otherwise, you're going to get a discontinuity between those things. And you're going to get burnout because people are not going to see the point. And of course, we keep talking about people. And whilst products are important, most risk walks on two legs. So have we got the right people for now and tomorrow doing the right roles and for the right reasons? Family businesses, sometimes you get people in senior roles because the son or daughter of the founder, which is again a limiting factor. So are those people developed? Are those people stretched, coached to change their perspective? Do we talk about potential? Or are we only focused on performance? Innovation, learning part of every role, support mechanisms. And really importantly is our leadership culture and culture reinforcing the chosen strategy. There's a big difference between what we think our culture is and what we've actually got. And again, on the customer side, or broader stakeholders, basically, are we treating them well for today, but are we treating them well for tomorrow? Is our brand truthful? Are we actually standing for what we say? Is there a healthy conflict between revenue and cost management? That's really important, isn't it? You expect to see not conflict, but healthy discussions between the finance department and the sales department. One's driving forward for the future and one's managing for today. So it's important those two things are right because you can't put all your effort in tomorrow and run out of cash today. And also, does the customer or stakeholder have as much voice as the financial and staff in internal dialogues? Because it's really important that we talk to our customers and the people that depend on what we do. All these things are not rocket science, but these are things you should be building into your processes to think about resilience. And leadership's really important, isn't it? Because leadership is changing and continues to change. And really, what leadership is about is how do you get performance greater than that you pay for in a very cynical sort of way. But it's true, isn't it? Are we focused too much on ourselves? Do we have too much arrogance and hubris as a leader? Is there far too much charisma and banter? Are we in the fur-lined rut, which is we're always in the comfort zone? Single central power base, is that the leader who takes all the decisions? Sometimes in tiny companies, only three or four of you, that person can end up just taking all the decisions, but also that doesn't get anyone better. So some of those things on the other sides are really important. So let's just figure out three things here. Firstly, process, focus, and bravery. We really need to get a grip of the financial ROI method or payback, whatever it might be. So we need to start measuring things and really working out how much things change money, make the difference. Second thing is accountability. Are we really clear about what we are accountable for, how we've delegated accountability to other people, not just responsibility? And also, how are we growing that adult culture? Are we having robust conversations with people where they are hearing what they need to hear and you're not frightened of saying things because it might hurt their feelings? Because we want to look at avoiding the dysfunctions of a team. And again, teams can be all sorts of sizes, made up of different sorts of issues. But look at this same things. You can see how these dysfunctions can be driven by poor leadership. And the point of team building is that you're getting results greater than the sum of the individuals working within that team. And also, it's remembering that process is something we can look at on a regular basis, going back to the process, making sure that we understand what makes up a process. And everything within your organization is a process, and making sure that the inputs we're putting in are getting the outputs that we need. And maybe using methods like lean to help us say, okay, we've got these processes, but are they working well enough for us? Are we doing too much work? I love the old Far Eastern explanation. I think it's probably Japanese, talking about muda, which is waste, and how many processes we have create waste, especially when times are good, because people invest in things when times are good. And actually, what can end up happening is that when times are bad, that you're cutting waste again, rather than cutting waste when times are good as well, so you have more money. And then you can use methods like this to put processes together, combine them, adapt them, put them to another move, get rid of them and reverse them. So you figure out really what's going on. This idea of pivoting and destroying is a really good idea. This is what the American tech idea is. It's about going in and talking about being a disruptor. So it's really useful. And you can link all your processes together. This is far too complicated for most organizations, but all of your processes build from people through process into customer into financials. So we can measure those sorts of things. And last but not least, it's really important that we think about our culture, the culture we have versus the culture we want. And culture is something that's really important in organizations because it's the sum total of what we do rather than what we say. It's the sum total of how your power structures work. So if a leader's standing there saying, I'm an empowering leader, but then takes every single bit of all the decisions and has all the budget, for example, these are really important. Budgeting for the finance director is really important. This is the budget. I've set it. This is now a control system. You bring in HR and they create a performance management system, which doesn't really work at all. You've got a control system that's suboptimal. You've got stories and myths based around the old culture. Didn't this happen when Mr. X said those things? They were fantastic. Let's do more of that. So we have to understand this concept of culture being that if you don't design what you want, you'll always have what you've got. So hopefully that whistle stop tour of some of those concepts will help you. If you want to send over in chat the sort of just one thing that you've chosen, that's absolutely fine. But carry out your audits, build your plan, look after yourself too. Remember, if you haven't done much within 72 hours, from it's all going to fall out your head. And here's the code to allow you to book some sort of session. So thank you very much for your time today. Hopefully that has been useful. And I do hope I'll meet some of you in the future. Many thanks.